very excited to do this series. I thought it was extremely relevant. Unfortunately, we're not able to meet together at this time and do a lot of the rituals of Shabbat that are really meaningful to us all, and is about being in community together. But so much of not just the Shabbat experience, but so much of Jewish life is actually central to the home, which is something maybe a rabbi shouldn't say that the home is the most important part of Jewish life and not the synagogue, but it's true. So I'll say it, so it's true. But I thought while we're going through this experience where that is our experience of Jewish life, because that's our experience of everything, being home, why not take a deeper look at those things? And hopefully add a little bit, learn a little bit about them, add some more meaning to those rituals that we all are familiar with, give a little more context. So that's the hope. And the first session we'll be talking about the Shabbat candles. So I think what we'll do, I think I'll probably read the sources. If someone has like a question that's timely about something I'm saying, please ask, and then also we'll open it up to more questions at the end. So the first source, we might as well start with the blessing, something that everyone's probably said or heard and familiar with. So the blessing on the candles of Shabbat. Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam, asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu l'hadlik ner shel Shabbat. Blessed are you, Lord our God, who sovereign of the universe, or King of the universe, who sanctified us with his commandments and commanded us to light the light of Shabbat. So what is this coming to suggest about this mitzvah? I think there's something striking or funny about this that actually comes up with a few other mitzvot. That this is not something that is specifically given in the Torah. We don't have an explicit mitzvah of lighting a candle from the Chumash, from the Torah. Nonetheless, we use this language of God having commanded us to do it, which is something that comes up. It's even more striking when it comes up with later things. So we say that about Hanukkah and Purim, which are much later historically holidays. We also use that language. So that has to do with that God gave us the power with the rabbis to decipher law, to understand it, for it to be an ongoing conversation. So in turn, it happens to be commanded by God, but it's not actually in that literal sense, perhaps. So that's one thing I want to call attention to, and just to have that for the context of the blessing. The second source is really just to give a little similar idea of something of the assumption, kind of the presumption of that this exists. So this is the first Mishnah that deals with the candles of Shabbat. And how does it start? I think that's what's the interesting part. Not so much the later sentences, but the first sentence is, with what may they kindle the Shabbat light, and with what may they not kindle them? This is actually a text that's commonly said, that's commonly read Shabbat between Kabbalat Shabbat and Mariv. We don't do it at our synagogue, but many synagogues do. And then it goes on to talk about the different materials that can be used for kosher candles. But what the important part is the Mishnah, our classical, our oral tradition, kind of taking for granted, just assuming that this is something we do. Not saying it is a mitzvah to have a candle in your home on Shabbat, not saying why we light candles on Shabbat, but just saying, what can we use? What can we use for candles? So it's totally taken for granted. It's an assumption that it's a deeply long-standing part of our tradition and law. What one might have thought, what's interesting, I don't know if people are familiar with the kind of small Jewish sects that throughout history there's been a lot of conflict with, but the Karaites, who don't follow the rabbinic law, who just follow biblical law, wouldn't have candles at all, because they believe that we have explicitly in the Torah a prohibition against fire. So they would say that doesn't just mean having it already lit. It means even if it was already lit, not just lighting it on Shabbat, but even having it beforehand. So they would sit in the dark on Shabbat. And that's people who just look at the biblical law. So maybe that says something about it, that it's something that this is a rabbinic institution. And just I think another interesting thing relating to that, and then we'll move on. These are just kind of for the background, these first two sources, that if anyone studied the Mishnah of Brachot, I do a class on that. I've been doing it on Wednesdays on Facebook Live. And before that, we were doing it at Shacharit when we met for Minyan during the week before coronavirus. But the first Mishnah of that and the first Mishnah of the Mishnah says, at what time do we read the Shema? Me'ematai Kriyin Shema ba'arvit. Evening service, what time do we read Shema? So there's also kind of this assumption. So these are like the really foundational, important things of our practice. The Mishnah kind of just takes for granted that they're done. It's the people know that they're done. So they know that we say Shema. We don't have to give the background of there's a commandment to say Shema. We say Shema, but that is explicit in the Torah. But for something like this, it also kind of uses that language, which I think is interesting, even though it's not something that's explicit in the Torah. Okay. Let's look at the third source. Now we're getting into the real practical applications of candlelighting. So the first source is from the Ramah, which is the Ashkenazi commentary on the Shulchan Aruch, which is the main body of law that we have, but written by a Sephardi author. So this is the Ashkenazi rabbi who commented on that to make sure that the Ashkenazi people using this as their reference for all of Jewish law will have their traditions, additions, or specific insights. Okay, so the Ramah says, some say to make the blessing before lighting, some say to make it after lighting. And in order for it to be over asiyato, do not derive the benefit of the mitzvah until after the blessing. You can do this by putting your hand over the candle after you light it, and then you make a bracha, and then you take away your hand. So I'm sure this sounds familiar, but also a little funny, a little different than what we do today. So what he's saying is that you actually cover the candle. Nowadays, maybe people have seen or done themselves, we cover our eyes, right? We cover our eyes when we do the lighting of the Shabbat candles. So that he's suggesting a similar practice done for the same reason, but in a little different way. So I think that's just interesting historically that we kind of shifted it in that way. But also, what's interesting here is the reason why. So first I have to explain this term that's used, the part that I left in Hebrew, over asiyato. So that means upon the performance of a mitzvah. So normally we say blessings, we say a blessing, and then we do a mitzvah action, right? So we say the blessing before we shake the lulav and etrog. We say most of our blessings this way. There's a few exceptions, but most of our blessings are you say the blessing and then you do the action because a blessing is like a preparation for a mitzvah action. Maybe it's to get you into the right headspace. It could also be that you should acknowledge that you're doing a mitzvah act because God commanded it. So you use this blessing formula that says Asher Kiddishanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu, that God commanded us to do this. So you're acknowledging that there's something holy, special, this action that you're about to do, and then you do the action. So it's kind of also this logical order. But we have a problem. We have a problem with candles. So for candles, we're concerned that if we bless, if we say Asher Kiddishanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu lahadlik ner shel Shabbat, then we are starting Shabbat. And now you wouldn't be able to light fire. It would be forbidden to light fire. So we have a problem that we have to fix. That potentially the issue is that the bracha, the blessing, would actually make Shabbat be official now, and then we wouldn't be allowed to light fire, and then you'd be stuck. Oh, you just said a blessing, you can't light your candles anymore. You said a blessing that wasn't for a good reason, so it's the problem of doing that, and you can't light your candles. So big problem. So what is the solution? So we light, we then say the blessing, and in order to make it this over asiyato, that halakhic principle I explained, that we want to do the blessing and then the mitzvah action, because that is the logical order of preparing for a mitzvah and acknowledging God before you do a mitzvah and saying, that's why I'm doing this action. So that we can do that, we cover our eyes or cover the candle, but we cover our eyes, that's our practice. So we light, we say the blessing with our eyes covered, and then we look. So then we're waiting to derive benefit from the light until we blessed it, so that we're not potentially taking on Shabbat and acknowledging this, this part of Shabbat that's so essential, having this light in the home, that we make sure that we can work all of that out so that we can say the blessing, we can have our light, and we can do it in the proper way over asiyato upon the mitzvah. Did someone have was that a question? Oh no, sorry. Okay, so I haven't been scrolling, so I'm just gonna scroll now. Okay, So that was source number 3, explaining why we do that over Asiyato and why we do cover our eyes. That's the explanation for that practice that that we do of covering the eyes. Okay, source number 4. Be meticulous to make sure to beautify the lighting of the Shabbat light. There are those who light 2 candles in relation to the 2 ways we are commanded to honor Shabbat. Remember Shabbat and keep Shabbat. Ramah, so again, so that was at first the Sephardi source, and then now the Ramah is going to be the Ashkenazi gloss on that. And he says, there are also those who light 3 or even 4 lights, which is their custom. You can always add to the light with more lights for additional family members or for whatever reason, but you can never subtract. So here it sounds like the technical halachic, the mandatory thing that we do is actually just 1 light. That we have a Shabbat candle. So it's something about having light, and then we have this additional layer, this idea that was added to that there's this remembrance of remember Shabbat, the 2 ways that we're supposed to relate to Shabbat, remember Shabbat and keep Shabbat. So Zachor et Yom HaShabbat, remember the Sabbath day, and Shomer Shabbat, Shamor et Yom HaShabbat. So the 2 ways are represented by the 2 candles. So this is the tradition of 2 candles, and that's become the normative practice. But what does he say? The Ramah adds that you can add to that. You can always add light. You can't take away. So a lot of people have a custom to add a candle for each child. So if they have 2 children, they'll light 4 candles. And there's different customs you can have. But once you add, you should keep it that way because we don't want to detract from light. We want to only be adding to light. Okay. Source number 5, a source from the Talmud. So Rava said, it is obvious to me. So they're having a debate about which things take precedence. The whole context they're dealing with Hanukkah candles, Shabbat candles, and wine for Shabbat Kiddush. And kind of this whole debate ensues about how we prioritize them. So if someone only has enough money to be able to afford one or the other, what takes precedence is an important question. Rava says, in the case of a poor person who must choose between purchasing Shabbat candles for his home or Hanukkah candles, the Shabbat candles for his home take precedence due to Shalom Bayit. So it's the first time we've said the concept, the value that's underlying this need for light in the home, for Shabbos candles, peace in the home. Between Shabbat candles and wine for Kiddush, the Shabbat candles take precedence because of Shalom Bayit. So this value, Shalom Bayit, that we just introduced, it seems from this very, very powerful, it's this very powerful force that there be peace in the home. So much so that these other really important values, and we know it's very important to have wine for Kiddush, it's very important to do the mitzvah of the Hanukkah candles, to make known, pursuing Nisa, to make known the miracle of Hanukkah. That's a very important value as well. But this value of Shalom Bayit is so powerful that it's taking precedence when it comes to these 3 things, actually. Any thoughts? I'll maybe say any thoughts on why that is, why it's so important, and then we'll actually talk about why, how do the candles actually make Shalom Bayit? If anyone has a thought on why this value would be so much greater than those others that it wins out.
Rabbi, I had a question just about the concept of adding but not taking away candles.
Mm-hmm.
So does that mean that if you like kind of commit to or start a practice of 3, 4, 5, that means you've committed to that, forever? Or can you go back to lighting 4, 3 and then?
Yeah, so it sounds like from this, and I'm sure there might be other opinions other ways. It sounds like from this that you should really think carefully before you take on a practice. Of course, taking on that practice for a child would be a good reason, and of course there's also and one would continue that indefinitely even when your kids are grown up or out of the house. It's still a good thing to continue. And of course, I'm sure there's extenuating circumstances, but that would be what it seems from this source, and I think from other sources as well. that you should really stick to the practice. If you add more, we don't want to have, a practice of detracting from light. So, think carefully before you change your custom, because it's something that you can indefinitely. Yeah.
Rabbi, I have a question.
Sure.
It's Jane.
Hi, Jane. Yeah.
Hi. I just wanted to ask, do you give precedence to buying candles if, pardon me, if you can't buy, like just say you're really poor, right? And that from what that number 5 said, if you're really poor and you can't buy for Shabbos and Hanukkah, then you buy for Shabbos. Is that because that's every week?
Okay, so there is that's a really good question, because that is a value that when it's the tadir velo tadir, tadir kodem, the thing that's more frequent takes precedence. I don't think that's clear. That's a great point that might have play a factor, but it's not from this text.
Can she, Rabbi? I can't hear you. Can she put that on mute? Is that Anna? Can she put it on mute? I can't hear you.
Is it better now? You hear me?
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay. So yeah. So I think yeah. So I was saying it's a very good point, and I think maybe it has some influence, because that is a value of the more frequent thing taking precedence.
Yeah.
But here it seems like there's no evidence of that. Just from this text alone, it seems to be saying that really it's just this idea of shalom bayit is so important. We'll keep going, and we'll see what does it have to do with shalom bayit? Why is fine? We could say shalom bayit is this really, really important value, but how does a candle have anything to do with it? So let's learn about that now. So we're to source 6. Okay, so Rashi says, and in a place where there is no candle, there is no shalom. One walks and stumbles and walks in darkness. Okay. So a very practical reason. And I think it goes a little further than just walking and stumbling. It also has to do with how would a family be with those circumstances, with walking around and stumbling and having your meal in the dark and not being able to read, and all the things that would come with being in a totally dark place, especially at a time where candlelight was the source of light. What impact would that have on the family? I think we could all. It's easy to think of that if that it would be difficult to have that meal if we're all sitting in darkness, or it'd be difficult to relate to each other in the way that we would want to. So let's keep going. And source 7 also discusses this topic. We say a blessing when lighting Shabbat candles. For lighting Shabbat candles is a requirement in order that we will have peace in our homes, so that one won't stumble on wood or stone. So it sounds like from these two sources, like the candle is a means to the value. We're commanded to have shalom bayit, and the candle is understood in a very practical sense as the thing that provides for that. Right, that we need light in the home. We need to be able to see each other and have a conversation and be able to read and do the other Shabbos activities that we want to do to have a nice, enjoyable Shabbos together. And it would have this negative effect if we weren't able to do that, and maybe that would cause fighting amongst the family, or people would get more annoyed with each other, and other problems that could lead to. So the commandment seems like is to actually have shalom bayit, and the ner, the candle, is a means to that. The Shabbos lights are a means to that value. Okay, let's talk a little bit about the next sources are about what this mitzvah, how it relates to men and women, why it's known as a mitzvah that's more important for women, and how it kind of in the relation with a husband and wife, how they relate to this mitzvah together. That's what the next sources are about. Okay, does everyone see source number 8? Okay. Source number 8. Both men and women are obligated to have a lit candle in their house on Shabbat. Okay, so everyone needs to have candles in their house. So if you're, when you're, for like before Amber and I got married and I lived with roommates, with guys, we would still need to have a Shabbos candle, even though none of us are married and don't have a woman in our house. So it's not just a mitzvah for women. It's a mitzvah that when there's a couple, when there's a husband and wife, the woman would have precedence in performing the mitzvah, but it's a mitzvah for all Jewish people to have candles in the home because of, again, going back to that value of Shalom Bayit. So that's something that all people, all kinds of relationships, all kind of living situations, we want all people to have Shalom Bayit. Okay, number 9, going a little further with that, both men and women are commanded to light, but women are more commanded than men, as it says in the Midrash, since she extinguished the lamp of the world, meaning she caused the death of the first human. And the Rambam explains that women are more obligated because they are found at home and they take care of the household needs. Okay, so there's two suggestions here. There's 2 offers as to why this is more of a mitzvah for women. One kind of a spiritual midrashic answer, and one a very practical sociological answer. So the first one has to do with Chava, with Eve. That bringing the light into the home is kind of a repair for women of that original of the problems that Eve brought into the world with her actions. That this is like a way of repairing that, a tikkun, like a fix for that. So that's the kind of spiritual reason. And there's a very practical, or maybe something that we can or cannot relate to, depending, in modernity. Maybe we do or don't relate to it as fully as what it says here. But here's historically this makes sense as a sociological response, that because the woman would be more likely to be caring for the home, taking care of the household needs, that also means, in a very practical sense, that she should be the one who's bringing light into the home, who's doing this action that's providing for the household needs, just like providing food for her family is a practical need. So too, providing this Shalom Bayit, providing light so that they have a nice Shabbos together, would also be a similar type of responsibility. Okay. And then source number 10 says, young men who travel to learn away from their homes must ignite the Sabbath lamp in their rooms and bless over them. But one who is with his wife need not ignite in his room and bless over them because his wife blesses for him. So this is saying that, so if he's alone, so maybe this is a setup where he would go and learn in yeshiva, even though he's married and be in a separate place from his wife, he needs to light for himself. Because like we said, we're concerned about this for all living arrangements, even if you're alone, everyone, all kinds of families, all kinds of roommate situations, whatever. This value of Shalom Bayit we want people to have. So if there's no option of his wife to do that, where in the home that he's in, then he should do it himself. But one who's with his wife, she should light. She should be the one to light if they're both in the same household together. And if he wants to have other candles in other rooms, then the blessing that she says covers all of those. So he wouldn't make another blessing. He would just say, okay, she makes a blessing on the candle in the main room, wherever the main candles are, and probably in the dining room would make sense. But if he wants to light candles in another place, it's without a blessing, because she's the one who's doing it for the home. Okay, and then the last one, I think this one's really interesting, and I think maybe kind of sums up everything that we're talking about, and I think will also be a great kickoff point for opening it up for discussion. I think this is a very nice source. Source number 11. For the first Shabbat after a woman gives birth, and this is the Mishnah Brura, so this is a later commentary on the Shulchan Aruch, that is a very important source in our Ashkenazi tradition, a very authoritative voice. So he says, for the first Shabbat after a woman gives birth, the man should light and make the blessing. And during the days when she is in a state of nidah, so during the time of when they separate during her menstruation and they don't have physical or sexual touch. She blesses alone. So there's two things in here. I think though, what they're both getting at though is that the idea of Shabbos candles. When we talked about that idea of Shalom Bayit, and we talked about bringing light into the home and increasing light and never detracting from light. There's something about this light, this and relates to Shalom Bayit, that is about nurturing, is about there's something intimate about it. There's something that is about nurturing and providing for the family, making sure that the family is a cohesive unit, that the couple has a meaningful just a meaningful relationship. So look at the second part first. So there's something about, I don't think this is the regular practice of most people. I'm not familiar if people do this, that the husband wouldn't be near her when she's blessing during Nidab. I don't think that's necessarily the case, but maybe for some people. But there's something there that is suggesting that there's some kind of intimacy in the action. And then I think what really like gives away and really communicates the point is the first half of this, that the first Shabbat after a woman gives birth, the man should light and make the blessing. So there's something about he needs to be in that moment taking care of her, that maybe all of her nurturing right now is going somewhere else, right? She needs to take care of herself. She needs to take care of the new baby, and so now it's his job to provide this kind of this spiritual nurturing that's normally so much associated in this traditional way with the woman's role in the family, being the source of nurturing, the source of bringing light into the home. That during this time where maybe she's more vulnerable, less capable, it becomes his responsibility to do. And I think all that relates to this idea of what Shalom Bayit is really about, and how the candles are kind of the embodiment of that, the physical representation of this idea of the home being a place of warmth and nurturing, it being a place of peace, it being a place where the couple, a husband and wife, have a meaningful and cohesive relationship, as well as with their children and entire family. So I'll end there.